Welcome back to Hour 3, and probably one of the scariest hours of the week. We talk about the truth, and again, the truth will set you free, but it may scare the pants off you first. And to help us, our preparedness expert and consultant, John Moore. His website is thelibertyman.com. He has a radio show on Genesis, on Red Public Network, that is, on 7 to 9 a.m. Central Time, Monday to Friday. We have Ann Morrison, our scientist and expert on volcanology, earthquakes, atmospheric changes, and radiation. Ann's website is homeland-defense, number 4u.com, and she sells emergency kits on her site and gives lots of information about ultraviolet light exposure and protection. And then, of course, at the bottom of the hour, we'll be having Robert Felix on talking about earthquakes and volcanoes and some very remarkable statements made by some, if you want to call it a climate activist that actually believes in this global warming garbage, that's actually made some very remarkable threats. I don't want to steal his thunder, so he'll say it when we get to the bottom of the hour. John, you were at a recent conference. What are the latest stories you have? And you mentioned a few on the break. A statement by Dr. McKenney, who is one of the most brilliant scientists in the modern era. And you made a statement about radiation activation of
Professor
things.
McKenney on my show the other day said that the Salk vaccines in the 50s and 60s had 30 different viruses that would be triggered or activated at a later time by exposure to radiation. Now, Professor McKenney is not one to give flippant statements or risk his career and his reputation by putting out information that can't be backed up. And, of course, just a moment ago, you found over 1,200 articles
yeah, I just went to PubMed, actually. I actually, listening to you make that statement, I went to PubMed right away, because there's other fancy search engines we scientists use to review. So I just went to PubMed and said, radiation activation of viruses, and I got 1,218 articles. Now, the original biological weapons research used cyclotrons to take animals and activate super pathogens or biological weapons. But most people aren't aware that the Salk vaccine, these vaccines actually were laced with all kinds of pathogens. The same way as in Gulf War I and II, and they had at least the SV40, simian virus 40 virus in there. The SV40, we know, can be dormant for 50, 60 years, and then all of a sudden, as your immune system failure cause brain cancer, liver cancer, all kinds of problems. It's very concerning because we know the amount of radiation background now here in North America varies between twice background level of radiation and 3 times background since Fukushima Daiichi a little over a year ago. We now have the danger of a massive increase in radiation as cooling pool number 4 hits the ground with the equivalent amount of plutonium to create 93,000 to 97,000 plutonium nuclear bombs. Literally the biological effect of World War III to the Northern Hemisphere. And this could happen any day if we have a level 7 earthquake, and that's by admission from the scientists. So radiation activation of infections will result in the following: Alzheimer's disease, heart attacks, autoimmune disease, birth defects, deformities, dementia, cardiac arrhythmias. I mean, virtually every illness you can imagine if you've got an activated virus, and most people don't realize that a quarter to a third of all vaccines are laced with one or more pathogens, from mycobacteria to fungi to viruses. And they almost all have contaminants. Plus, they have adjuvants that can activate your immune system. So this is, if his statement is correct, and I'm going to research this as well, this is a very serious problem because we're already being bathed with radiation that's bioaccumulating. And even if it just trickles, like it is right now, like Chinese water torture, only it's nuclear, in the next 5 to 10 years, our bodies will accumulate an amount of radiation equivalent to World War III in North America. And if the cooling pool falls in Japan, they're going to have to evacuate Tokyo and greater Tokyo area and the northern islands immediately. That could happen literally tomorrow. Absolutely.
Well, if we can segue here, the Examiner.com, which I believe is the online version of the Boston Examiner, not exactly a marginal source of news, they're reporting that 2 attorneys representing the President of the United States swore under oath today, or yesterday, that the birth certificate submitted to the public by the White House is a forgery.
Oh, boy.
It's major news being reported by what could be regarded nothing other than a mainstream news source. Hopefully it'll get some legs and run, and the House Judiciary Committee will do the right thing and finally institute an investigation to the qualifications of this man to hold the office of President of the United States, which they need to do, and they're the only ones that can really do anything about it.
Yeah.
Of course, declined to do so far, but maybe this will give them the courage and the backbone to go ahead and do something right.
Yeah, yeah. I think that Sheriff Arpaio's work and work in California and other states, we're going to start seeing a tsunami of deregistration from voter registries in different states. And once it happens in one state, it's going to spread.
You're right. That's how this came about in New Jersey. It was a challenge to his eligibility to be on the ballot in New Jersey, and the Obama attorneys had to show up in court, and part of the evidence was going to be the documentation that provided by Sheriff Arpaio that the birth certificate is a computer-generated forgery.
I think when I put two and two together, and I've got information lately that both Bill and Hillary Clinton knew that Obama was a fraud, and it was being hanging over Obama's head like Damocles' sword. I think that Hillary Clinton is ready to run as the first female presidential candidate, and that wouldn't surprise me at all. She's the most evil person I've ever physically met on the planet in my entire life.
Well, she wants to be president so bad she can taste it, and this man is her goal enough. Between now and the end of the Democratic National Convention, the next few months, well, I think that convention is either in August or September.
And people should understand that the woman is a genius. She's also malignantly evil. And when we see her laughing at the death of Muammar Gaddafi and laughing about what happens with these other events, including the missile downing over North Korea that was probably hit by one of our space-based weapons, Hillary Clinton is really dangerous.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, she's really dangerous. And, if you think any of our previous presidents were problem children, this woman has to say, been sufficiently cursed by her ancestors to be avatared by some of the biggest, baddest demons you can imagine.
Well, it's pretty scary, and it's not exactly a leap in logic to believe this woman could end up being a Democratic candidate.
Oh, easy. In fact, right now the practice, and then state organizations in California and elsewhere tried to see if they could put other candidates together, and they've been summarily trounced by not only ACORN, which is another criminal organization, and the DNC, which basically has been covering up the fact that they've known all along Obama is illegitimate.
Right.
But when they wanted Obama like that, they wanted him on a very short chain so we do exactly what the globalists want, which is to destroy America. Last year we became energy independent. There's no need for us to be building new nuclear reactors with old-style technology. Places like Japan, we're not bringing any technology in from DARPA or other things to actually help them get rid of this or control it, but we're right downwind of them. We're literally in the tailpipe of a radioactive nation about to collapse, and we just are doing nothing. And Obama preens around the Blue Room behind the White House, Oval Office, and acts like he's just some kind of a rock star, and the fact is he's a fool.
Well, he's doing what he's being paid to do. He's an empty suit
right.
That's given a script, and he follows the script.
Exactly, and he has a very short choke chain. In fact, I'm sure the choke chain on Obama politically is shorter than any previous president that's ever been in office.
I agree, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why I think that Obama is a one-term president. If he gets a second term, it'll be a very strange thing indeed, because I think that Hillary would be the number one candidate. I would think they would pile it in there if they try to start fighting. He gets too bloodied by these things, they're going to pull him, because they want to continue the Democratic policies. And, of course, Romney will only get the nomination, even though he's, moving ahead with a lot of cash. If he makes a lot of compromises to conservative elements, his wife, Ann Romney, is making a lot of very conservative statements. So we're going to have to see the Dr. Jekyll, not the Mr. Hyde version of Romney, which means he's going to be pro-life, he's going to be pro-personhood, he's going to be pro-personal rights rather than Obamacare, which is Romney care, basically reverberated.
That's right.
We're going to see a different Romney. We're going to see the Dr. Jekyll version of Romney, not the Mr. Hyde.
Well, at least until the man raises his right hand and has his left hand on the Bible, we will.
Yeah, and his other thumb on the big red button. Back in a moment. And we're back with Ann Morrison. Ann, let's continue with Ann and John. We have the Popocatépetl volcano that's now active over Mexico. In fact, I recall the prophecy from Edgar Cayce that says when Etna is active, which just got activated literally over a week ago, and Popocatépetl gets active as well as one down in the Caribbean, that this is one of the end time signs. And I do believe that the earthquakes all over the earth, there's 500% increased earthquakes in Japan near Sendai. It's literally earthquake central. This is getting very nuts. So tell us about what's going on with the ash cloud and the possibility they may have to evacuate Mexico City. The ash is already heading toward Florida as we speak.
Well, John made a statement this morning about Popocatépetl and Etna. What was that, John?
I don't think I made a connection between the two of those this morning.
No, that's what I mentioned this morning. The fact is the connection was a word, one of these readings, and again, I don't put too much weight in it, but when I see them all happening, I start to say, that was mentioned before, wasn't it? Oh, that was Edgar Cayce. Now, a lot of people don't think Edgar Cayce is a Christian. The fact is he proclaimed to be a Christian all his entire life. God knows how his gifts were given, but he was also a gentle person. He never saw in his fruit anything that he did violent or evil. So I would say we should heed what he says when it starts to happen. How's that?
Sounds good. Anyway, the volcano is southeast of Mexico City, so it's closer to the Caribbean than it is to the Pacific Ocean, and it has sent a plume of hot rock and ash half a mile into the air. And so they increased the alert level to level 5 out of 7. And if it goes to 6, then they will force evacuations. The most violent eruption occurred in 1,200 years, occurred in December 18, 2000, so that was about 12 years ago. And during that time, tens of thousands were forced to evacuate. But they don't say anything about Mexico City at that time. They think that, now I'm looking at the jet stream right now, and the jet stream across Mexico is going east, and they say the plume is going east. And it looks like it's going to hit Florida, the bottom part of Florida.
Now, all these earthquakes and volcanoes, and I know you get a chance to interview Dr. McCanney. One of the things that I've researched, and I've recently been able to pull up more and more data on this, is the fact that after December 21st, we're going to move into a different torsion field, which is a structure of time-space, where the plasma fields of the sun and the earth, the magma, the earth is a giant nuclear reactor, is going to change. And that changing is like changing gears, which means the lithosphere, which is the crust of the earth, on the nuclear reactor, the mantle of the earth, is going to start slipping. And that slip doesn't mean it'll happen like in a few minutes or hours. It could occur over a few months. But what's going to happen is we're going to start seeing what are called superquakes, plus magnetic and geomagnetic shifts, which occur with a drop also in the ozone layer, because it requires three things: ultraviolet light, oxygen, and a magnetic field. And the magnetic field's already rapidly decreasing. It's ready to actually do a flip or reverse. And according to the geological record, when it reaches about 15% of its normal strength, it flips. So we've already seen major changes in the geomagnetosphere before the Santiago, Chile earthquake a year ago. We're likely to see some really big and very crazy things happen. And the Bible, of course, in Jeremiah and elsewhere said that the earth will shake like a hut and every wall will fall, which means at some point earthquakes are going to be so devastating worldwide that any building that has walls isn't going to have walls anymore.
Well, that's right. And the Bible does say in Matthew 26 that in the end times one will be taken and one will be left. So we expect a reduction in the population by a factor of 2.
I want to continue that statement. Jesus said, but who's taken? And Jesus actually said, if you understand the Aramaic, where the vulture is, there is the body. In other words, he's saying evil are going to be taken out because they're going to make plans that are going to set themselves into evil positions against God. And God's going to allow them to make mistakes that will take them out of the gene pool.
Oh.
Well, that's a good thing.
Isn't that an interesting thing? So a lot of people are waiting for the rapture. The rapture is not of the good, it's of the evil. And it's going to be set by their own schemes and devices, like drilling underground for these underground hotels or off-world space platforms. They're going to be very sadly mistaken that if you don't put your rest, as it says in Psalm 91:1, which is my favorite scripture, in the wings of the Most High God, you're in devastatingly dangerous territory. So things are going to start happening. So, John, in the last few weeks, we see on again, off again war against Israel, against the Iran. Now the Iranians are saying they're more than willing to accept the idea of inspectors, and they really don't want to make a bomb because it's anti-Islamic. The Israelis are pitching a fit that they can't actually do an attack on Iran, which doesn't make sense because Israel, the best thing they could do is to shine their missiles and keep them in their silos underground, because it is a deterrent against these a couple 100,000 Hezbollah missiles in Syria and Lebanon. But once they start a preemptive attack, all holds are barred, and they're going to just start firing everything they can at Israel, and it's going to kill everybody that's standing.
That's right. Well, so a preemptive attack on a part of Israel would be the absolute worst thing that they could do. They'll be on the wrong side of history, the wrong side of international law, and they'll make themselves a legitimate target for retaliation.
Not only retaliation, by the way, by the Arab states, but by Russia. It's very likely that Russia and China will actually retaliate because they're, in a sense, China now is a standing ally of Pakistan and Iran.
Right.
And they made it very clear that if there's an attack, we're going to see nuclear missiles flying at Europe from Pakistan and from China and Russia.
Yeah, I usually refer to Iran as a first-tier client state of Russia and China both.
Right.
They Saddam was a second or third-tier client state of Russia, but a first-tier state like Iran gets the greatest and the best when it comes to communications, defense equipment, missiles, communications equipment, everything.
Well, they just finished, this is another thing I want to ask your military experience, they just finished a very advanced Russian radar early warning base in Damascus. They also put one in Tehran and other territories near Bashir. They've also put Russian troops on the Russian-Iranian border near Azerbaijan. And they made statements, Lavrov and the other Russian generals have made statements that they know the Israelis and our special forces, etc., have already pre-placed troops in Georgia and Azerbaijan, and said if they make a move, they'll, quote, flatten them. That's actually public statements. It's not something I'm making up. I mean, everybody should stand back, take a deep breath, and realize, like, ooh, it's not a good time for Armageddon.
No, Russian generals are not known to make flippant statements. They will be backed up with hardware.
Yeah, exactly. And the Russians there's two people on Earth I want people to make a very clear understanding about this. Two people on Earth you do not screw with, Syrians and Russians. If you do, you're asking for devastation. There's two people on Earth, and you need to remember this. When the Russians don't want war and they're doing everything to sue for peace, and the same with the Syrians, for God's sake, do something to get peace. Because if you go to war, they will fight to the last man until you are devastated, and they will do things you can't even imagine. And they can punch way above their weight, Syria and Iran, and we will be very sorry for starting it.
Absolutely, I could not agree more.
In fact, one of the first things they'll punch above their weight is they've got all the old Russian bioweapons, and if we attack them, they'll be releasing them in Chicago and Atlanta and all over the United States and the West and London. And I expect that if we continue to push this, we would not be surprised if something terrible happens in the London Olympics this coming June. I think London Olympics is a playground for the devil.
It could be, absolutely.
Back in a moment. Welcome back with our amazing panel of John Moore, Ann Morrison, Robert Felix. Again, the websites are thelibertyman.com, homeland-defense4you.com, and Robert, your website is icehnow.info, and you've got some very interesting information and statements by an activist for called the Global Warming Carbon Dioxide is a Death Gas from Hell crowd. Tell us the latest of what this threat is, published in Forbes magazine. What does it mean?
That's right. Published in Forbes magazine. And I'm doing a quote here, let their houses burn, says warmist Steve Zwick, and he said that in Forbes magazine. He said, let's start keeping track of them, meaning we deniers. Let's make them pay. And he said this in Forbes. You know, if skeptics said something like this, or if you or I said something like this, we'd be thrown in jail as terrorists by tonight. I think this kind of it's intimidation, no way around it, and I think it's inexcusable. And I wonder why in the world Forbes is giving coverage to this sort of thing. But let me just actually quote the guy here. This is what he wrote in Forbes. We know who the active denialists are. Not the people who buy the lies, mind you, but the people who create the lies. Let's start keeping track of them now, and when the famines come, let's make them pay. Let's let their houses burn. Let's swap their safe land for submerged islands. Let's force them to bear the cost of rising food prices. They broke the climate. Why should the rest of us have to pay for it? You know, that sounds like old-fashioned Soviet purge techniques to me. And you just think about it here. In this last 2 weeks, we've learned that 49 NASA scientists disputed their NASA's global warming mantra. The Bering Sea has set new records for the most ice in recorded history. Polar bears and penguins are thriving. And I just posted this week that Himalayan glaciers are growing bigger. I don't think we had a chance to talk about
Yeah, let's do that. I heard that last week. We needed to talk about that. The Himalayan glaciers, and they said, well, they're bucking the trend. The reason is the Earth is getting colder. Rainfall is the thing that drives us into ice ages, and it's driven by volcanism that happens in cycles that are happening every time there's an ice age. You get an increase in earthquakes and volcanic activity.
You do. Yeah, and right now, well, I understand that you mentioned that Ann mentioned the Shivalik volcano earlier in the program, but there's like 130 volcanoes on Kamchatka Peninsula, and 120. 29 of those are active. So there's stuff going on right now that people need to be aware of. But yes, the glaciers in the Himalayas are growing bigger, and this is the IPCC just 5 years ago was telling us that those glaciers on the Himalayas would all have melted by 2035, and that's just a giant lie. We're just not being told the truth, and now it turns out that satellite data is showing that glaciers in part of the Karakoram Range, and that's on the China-Pakistan border, that they are putting on mass. In other words, they're growing bigger. And then they say that they're defying the general trend toward glaciers.
Oh, gee. Well, it's lies and more lies. Now we've got Google Earth and satellite imaging. The other thing that's happening, by the way, is the productive food zones are collapsing, and actually it's collapsing fastest in China. Now, China is on a very aggressive stance, and there's two different political stances in China. And we have to realize that if you look at the satellite photos of the missile launching system for this latest missile that the Kim Il-un tried to launch, and it was failed. It probably was actually hit by one of our space-based weapons or just their incompetence. But the actual missile launching gantry that was built there was completely Chinese-made. So the Chinese are actually totally collaborating with this rogue nation state of North Korea, this crazy state that's trying to, blackmail us into giving them food for stopping their nuclear program. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Oh, it is. Well, I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this. You're talking about the desert expanding, but we're going to be seeing more and more crop failures because of cold. Just 5 days ago, Piers Corbyn, he's an astrophysicist in the United Kingdom. Just 5 days ago, he predicted that the United Kingdom would have its coldest month of May in 100 years. Now today, the official meteorological office in the United Kingdom has confirmed that. They also expect the coldest May in 100 years. So what happens when the farmers there are starting to try to plant their crops? They're not going to be able to plant in time.
Well, Robert, they're also having a severe drought in the United
Kingdom. Talk about that drought, John. This is important. That means we're going to have massive food shortages by the fall, and I think we're also, as Ann says, we're up to in the not too distant future going to get UV shock this summer that's going to knock out a lot of our crops. So if you're not setting aside canned foods, dehydrated foods, and inherited seeds, and a greenhouse that can block ultraviolet light, don't expect the crops to survive or the food to be on the shelf next fall. We're going to start seeing real famine, And I believe we're at the end of the 7 fat years like the time of Joseph, and we're about to enter the 7 lean years very soon. In fact, this is the prophecy of Joseph, which is a fulfillment back at the time of Joseph when he went to Egypt, and it was sold by his brothers, that later he saved the whole nation of Israel, and they were entering into those lean years are coming out very soon, and I believe 2012 is the start of the lean years.
Well, those who are prepared to deal with it will get through it much better than those who don't.
Exactly. That means that we're going to have radiation shock and food shortages, and the food prices are going to go skyrocket, especially like the word now in China is that their food prices are rising at 6 to 8% per month.
Whoa.
Yeah, per month. And it's not just because of their currency. One of the lies is that, it's their currency doing it. No, it's not. It's collapse in food supply, so they're buying up land in Australia and South America and elsewhere to grow crops and then move it to China because their arable land in China is either being poisoned by industry or it's being eaten up by the giant deserts, desertification that's occurring in northern China that's happening at an amazing pace.
Well,
remarkable.
It should be a heads up for everybody listening to us, Dr. Bill, that they should take some initiative and do the things that you're suggesting. Have an ultraviolet resistant greenhouse. Make sure that people become food self-sufficient as well as water self-sufficient.
Right. Now, the latest big earthquakes are, we had some real big ones off the west coast of Sumatra, 5.2, a 4.8 at the Macquarie Island region, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8 at the Iran-Iraq border region. That's interesting. The Iran-Iraq border region, there's a giant earthquake, a bunch of them, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, all occurring very recently within the last couple of hours.
Well, that area of the world is going to be seismically active anyway, so that surprised me.
Yeah, exactly. And anything else? What about space weather? What's going on there?
Well, luckily, space weather has been fairly quiet, although we are coming up to a solar boundary. The solar boundary means that the magnetic field, the interplanetary magnetic field, changes its direction from north to south. And normally that crossing occurs every 8 days, but it only seems to affect the Earth's magnetosphere when it goes from south to north. And so we're not expecting it to impact the magnetosphere, and I haven't seen any indications that any of our geosynchronous satellites have been affected. However, we have been getting a steady stream of ions from the sun, and they are affecting the aurora borealis, which is around the Arctic Circle.
And there's also a Lyrid meteor shower going to occur on Saturday night, April 21st. There's also what's called plasma clouds. These are coming in on April 18th and 19th, a series of minor CMEs puffed away from the sun. And they're heading in the general direction, and the Goddard Space Weather Center has been looking at these. There's an area of the sun that's super active, and it's like a guy with a shotgun sitting on a rotating platform, and that guy has lots of bullets. And if he happens to aim those CME bullets toward Earth, we're going to have major power outages here in North America because those CMEs are getting more violent, more dangerous, and the aim of the guy on the sun is getting better. So that just has to swing in our direction, and we're going to have some big problems with our satellites and ground-based power distribution networks. Welcome back, and mentions of interesting things in hand, and John, and Robert, the issue of what's going on with Iceland, of course, and with these volcanoes activities. What's happening? What's the latest, Ann and Robert?
Ian, I think you were talking about what's going on in Iceland, and then I'd like to talk about what that portends.
Okay, well, I've just noticed that about the 75th north latitude, we have 3 major seismic areas, and one of them is close to Anchorage, Alaska, and that's the Lemania volcano, which has been inactive for as long as we know, and it is starting to rumble to life. We have the Katla volcano in Iceland at about the same latitude, and then we have the Shevelek volcano on the Kamchatka Peninsula off of eastern Russia. And it just seems like, the other places along that parallel, all across Russia, there's no volcanoes that we know of, even through Sweden and Norway, and of course Greenland we don't know of any, and Canada we don't know of any on that parallel. But we do have, where there are volcanoes on the 75th latitude north, they do seem to be active, and I'm just wondering if the magma is being pushed up northwards towards the Arctic Circle.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I worry about, with all of this volcanic activity in Iceland, is that we need to remember that Iceland is just a part of the MidAtlantic Ridge that happens to be sticking up above the water. But almost all of the MidAtlantic Ridge is underwater. It is a chain of underwater mountains. Something like, I think it's 40,000 kilometers long. I mean, it is huge. What is that, like 20,000 miles long? And it's some scientists describe it as being like, if you look at the globe, if the water weren't there, you'd see this raised seam, like the raised seam on a baseball, that travels for 20,000 miles. And how much of that underwater mid-Atlantic ridge is right now volcanically active?
Exactly. In fact, there's 23 million of these venting hydrothermal vents, isn't there?
And we have no idea. Still, we know more about the moon than we know about underwater volcanoes. But
I think we're looking at the Sargasso Sea. It's the southern extent of the same ridge that forms Iceland. And it's probably actually the territory they talked about beyond the Pillars of Gibraltar. That is the main area of the ancient empire 12,000 years ago of Atlantis. I believe that Atlantis was in the Sargasso Sea.
It could be. I don't know. But what I do know is that it's there. Well, one of the things that we talked about last week, but during an ice age, of course, sea levels are 370 feet lower than they are now. So I think it is very, very possible that there was that city out there, and
which would be territory in the area of the Bimini Islands, of the Bahamas, etc., that would fit in with a lot of the things written by Aristotle and the ancient Greeks about the fall of Atlantis.
Sure, and then as the ice age ended and the ice covering Canada started to melt, then the sea levels started to rise. But, when they talk about rising sea levels have been rising for 11,500 years. That's nothing new.
Yeah.
But in the last 2 years, actually, it turned around. The last 2 years, sea levels have actually declined.
John, I want to ask you a question. You interviewed Dr. McCanney on your program, and you're becoming quite an expert on this whole area. There's a proof now of disjunction between the crust of the earth and the mantle, which means that in the ancient world, it's in the Bible, it says Pangea, where all the continents were together and then they were split up.
Right.
And the earth is, by the way, not 7,000 years old. That's another foolish thing that made by people that are not using, they're going back to Bishop Ussher in Ireland and so on, and all kinds of statements that are not true. God is a God of a vast universe. But what happens is the continents were broken apart and they drifted for months at a relatively rapid pace, so say 1.6 miles an hour. If the continents moved at that pace for 2 months, it would move, say, North America 1,200 miles. It's been known that from geological records that Alaska, I think it's something like 8 million years ago, was on the equator. Now, we need to understand that there's evidence that the Earth has moved, and when they first found this out, they used torsion field imaging to look through the crust of the Earth from space in the 50s and early 60s, and they found all these pock marks on the Earth that were looking through the crust down miles into the crust of the Earth. And they said, gee, there's these dormant magma domes. So they did geological investigation, found there was no feeder hotspot feeding those magma domes. There were actually old volcanoes where the crust of the Earth had actually been slipped, like the heating up skin of a peach that's been cooked over a flame, and the skin slides.
Sure.
And so what has Dr. McCanney mentioned anything about that? Because I don't think we're going to have quite a full pole shift, but I think we're going to have a magnetic shift and a crustal slip where the continents are going to move. And looking at my analysis of what I see so far, the North Pole has been moving at an ever-increasing pace towards Siberia. The crust will move in the opposite direction, which means we'll see a move of the equator probably if it moves, say, 20 degrees, it'll cross through Havana, Cuba, and the United States will be in the position of Mexico is right now.
Right. Well, for those of us on the ground being part of it, we won't know if it's a pole shift or a crustal shift. All we'll know is that things have changed dramatically, and we have different growing seasons. And here in North America, of course, things will get a lot warmer.
Right.
And I don't know that Professor McCanney has addressed that specifically, but it certainly is something that is possible.
Yeah, in fact, if you actually look at areas where things dramatically changed, I have had friends that actually went from Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and Bedford Institute in Halifax that went to Baffin Island, and they exhumed the bones and the tusks of giant woolly mammoths there, and vegetative plants and trees that were Douglas fir-type trees and redwood forests were up several hundred feet. The area of Baffin Island is actually almost as big in surface area as Australia. It's a giant island, almost a continent. And the associated islands near it up in the Arctic Circle. And most people don't realize that this event happened roughly 12,000 years ago, and it occurred in a matter of hours because there were woolly mammoths 6 times the mass of an African element, frozen solid with food in their mouth.
That's right.
And their tusks were 26 feet long, 26-foot-long tusks, not little animals. These are big sucker animals.
Right. Well, there's thousands of them still frozen in the tundra of Siberia waiting to be found as well.
Believe it or not, you can go to Paris and there's exclusive restaurants that'll still serve you frozen meat from Siberia, right, and from the tundra up there, flown in specifically from Siberia, that are still fresh enough that they can actually serve it. They're still serving it.
They were doing it in the 1890s. I didn't know they were still doing it.
They're still doing it in special exclusive restaurants in Paris, but I think it's only certain times that they can do it when they fly it in, but apparently they do have shipments of Siberian. And then, by the way, they're also going to actually birth, I think in the next year or two, they're going to birth a woolly mammoth. They've done genetic engineering to have an elephant deliver a woolly mammoth.
That would be phenomenal.
Yeah, they've actually extracted the DNA, and they're doing genetic tests to actually cause an embryoblastula to have an elephant birth a woolly mammoth.
That would be phenomenal. Absolutely.
It's like Jurassic Park, only with mammoths now.
Jurassic Park come to life.
Yeah. People think, oh, you can't do that. Well, no, there were insects that drew blood from dinosaurs millions of years ago, and believe it or not, the amber that those insects are embedded in, which are stones, have kept that DNA intact. With DNA synthesizers, you can actually reconstruct the DNA of the dinosaurs. People think that that's not possible. Sorry, you're in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. Virtually anything that says, like in the book of Genesis, anything that we put our mind to is possible for mankind, because we are a co-creator with a creator God, and we can do good if we listen to God, and we can only do evil continuously if we don't.
Absolutely.
So people need to grasp that, and if we don't restrain the evil going on, as I say, we want to have the good version of Romney if he does get the candidacy, and we want to have a very short choke chain on him, because Romney in his worst position may be a very dangerous man. And of course, the worst candidate to have out there, I think even worse than Obama, is Hillary Rotten Clinton. If she gets a position of power, literally, it won't be God help us. It'll be, oh my gosh, we're there.
Well, Dr. Bill, it looks like we're at the end of the hour. This is the Liberty Man thanking you and signing off.
And again, the website is thelibertyman.com. Your show is 7 to 9 a.m. on Republic Radio. And you've done amazing work, your Homeland-Defense for you. And, of course, Robert Felix, you've also recently been on Coast to Coast Radio. Your books are Ice Age. Your website is iceagenow.info. The books is Not by Fire, but by Ice, and Magnetic Reversals and Evolutionary Leaps. Amazing updates weekly. And, of course, we'll also do some updates on our live stream TV channel, because things are going to start happening more quickly every week and every month, especially with things like Popocatépetl, Iceland, and earthquakes occurring all the way from Christchurch in New Zealand to Sendai, Japan. Things are starting to really rock and roll.